I want to welcome everyone to this last Carla presentation of the fall semester. I'm Karen Larson, and I work at the Center for Advanced Research on Language Acquisition, better known as CARLA, at the University of Minnesota. Before I introduce the speaker today, I want to alert you to presentations coming up this spring. You can learn more about these presentations and sign up for the Zoom link by using the QR code or the URL on the slide. We'll be adding presentations in the coming weeks, so we encourage you to check back. We are delighted to have Larry Warren as our presenter today. Larry is a PhD candidate in Hispanic linguistics in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese Studies at the University of Minnesota. This presentation grows out of CARLA's Graduate Research Assistant competition that provides funding for graduate students to work with instructional faculty at the University of Minnesota on a research project during the summer. The faculty supervisor for this project was Carol Klee, who is professor of Hispanic linguistics in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese Studies at the U. Carol will facilitate the Q&A at the end of the presentation. Please put your questions in the chat for the speaker to answer at the end. And without further ado, I will turn this over to Carol.
Great. Thank you, Karen. And hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for today's CARLA presentation. As Karen mentioned, I'm Carol Klee from the University of Minnesota, and I have the pleasure of serving as co-advisor together with my colleague Mandy Menke for our presenter today, Larry Warren. And again, as Karen mentioned, Larry and I received a CARLA Summer Research Assistantship that supported Larry's dissertation research, specifically the coding and analysis of the data that she'll be presenting today. Her dissertation grows out of her interest in measuring and evaluating oral fluency in the Spanish of second language learners. Specifically, she asked how task type and proficiency level shape features such as speech rate, pauses, and self-repairs. And by comparing students' performance across tasks, her study sheds light on how fluency varies across assessment contexts, and also what this might mean for how we evaluate oral proficiency in a second language. So with that brief introduction, I'm delighted to turn things over to Letty.
Thank you so much, Carol and Karen, for the introduction about my project. And as they said, I'm Larry Warren from the University of Minnesota, and I'm going to present my research about the impact of task type and proficiency level in the assessment of oral fluency in Spanish as a second language. But before starting, I want to thank both of my advisors, Dr. Carol Klee and Dr. Mandy Menke, and the people who helped me with this statistics they have for all this research. My colleague, William Cornejo and Ray Shu from LATIS, and the Research Methodology Consulting Center for their support. And of course, to Carla for the summer funding. So to start the presentation, this is like the briefest structure expected. I'm gonna start with some background information about fluency. Then I'm gonna move on my research questions, data encoding, results, and then at the end, I'm gonna finalize with my conclusions and implications. So to start, fluency is a key element in the assessment of oral ability in a second language. There are three main approaches to this one: cognitive fluency, utterance fluency, and perceived fluency. In my case, I'm going to be focused on the utterance fluency, so just for you to have like a reference about this emphasis. The utterance fluency is considered as a quantifiable oral skill, and as such, it is measured through acoustic measures. So this one is divided into speed, breakdown, and repair. There are different measures in each one, but the ones that I have here are just an example. So we have a speech rate for the speed, pause duration for breakdown, and mean length of run for repair. So these are just examples, but there are more measures on this. So now taking this like into the real evaluation way. Currently, oral fluency is evaluated through different formats, such as the ones for research purposes, like picture descriptions, reading plus pictures, or narration of videos. So the participants who are taking this type of exams, they just need to describe what they see in the pictures, or they have to read some paragraphs and describe the picture, or they just watch a video and then narrate what they watch in the video. So this is like the main formats used for research purposes in oral fluency. In a more practical way, there are other exams such as the oral interviews, like the Oral Proficiency Interview, OPI, or in the case of Spanish, Diploma de Español como lengua extranjera, DELE. So we have like different formats. However, despite these formats are widely used, there are some disadvantages. So talking about the exams for research purposes, the main disadvantages these ones have is that evaluators know the content in advance. So there's not really so much opportunity to really understand what the participant is saying because they already know beforehand the content of the test. Then we have a narrow view of what it means to express a communicative message because as they just follow the description of the picture or the videos, they the one who's taking the exam cannot communicate more than this. It's just like based on the picture received for the test. Then we have that the representation of the reality is based on conversational cooperation rather than being predetermined, because that is what's happening here. The ones who are taking the exam already know the content with the pictures and that kind of things. They really don't have like the real life exposure to really face something unknown or something that they don't know what to expect. So this is different, and there is a mismatch in this case. Then in the case of the oral interviews, the interview style exam lacks attention to contextual factors, which restricts the definition of conversational interaction. Because there is the difference in power, talking about pragmatics, the one who's managing the interview, who's the evaluator, he or she is the one in charge of managing the conversation. So they are the one like they have more power. So there is not the same levels at the time of the speaking. And that's why the interaction is not exactly the same one. And that one is related with the last point that in an ideal conversation, it is expected to have the option to really negotiate interpretations and to have more interaction and to feel more freedom in that sense. But in an interview style, it doesn't work that way because the one who's taking the exam cannot really ask questions to the evaluator or things like that. They are more just answering questions and is more restricted, the communication in that sense. So considering these disadvantages of these formats, my proposal is to use the scenarios, which are situations created based on events that can occur in real life, involving a problem or an unexpected event, and they require the use of interaction to resolve. So what are the main features of this proposal? The learner knows the role they will play. So that's different than in a role play, for instance, because the learner just knows it's a role, but don't know the role of the other. So that's something quite important to know. And as they don't know the role of the other, there is something unknown that creates a dramatic tension. And that's why they are kind of forced to communicate because there is something that they don't know. And when they are communicating in the scenarios is when they realize there is something that they have to negotiate. That's why the scenarios are adaptable to any pragmatic competence in general or level. And that's why, because of the dramatic tension or the unknown situation, it encourages the interaction and the communication. So to see if my proposal really solves the previous disadvantages for the other methods used, I have created the next research questions. So the first one, does utterance fluency vary in interview type, LP, which I'm going to explain in the next slide, versus conversational, which is the scenario, assessments of Spanish as a second language, and if so, how? And the second question is, what are the differences in utterance fluency between the intermediate and intermediate high advanced levels of Spanish as a second language. In this sense, I'm going to compare two types of tasks, interview style and conversational style exam, and two levels. So in order to answer these questions, I collected the next data. So I recruited 28 participants, 14 per level, 14 of intermediate level and 14 of intermediate high advanced level. They perform an LPE, which is the Language Proficiency Exam at the exam established at the University of Minnesota. This is an interview style exam, which lasts around 15 minutes. That exam is taken with me directly, one-on-one. And what it is evaluated here is the text type, the vocabulary, the creation with the language, the accuracy, and at the end, there is a role play. As if it's the same exam for both levels, it was adapted to both months based on the actual guidelines of intermediate, medium, and intermediate high levels. And in the intermediate, there was a role play where they had to ask some questions based on a situation given. And in intermediate high advanced level, the participants needed to solve like a more problematic situation, so it was a little bit more complex. So the LP was adapted to both proficiency levels. Besides the LPE, the participants completed after a scenario. So after performing the LPE, the students were paired with someone of the same level, and they performed the scenario. They were given a context to both of them, and as the data was collected by Zoom, they were divided in breakout rooms where each role information was given to each one in different rooms. So they role A didn't know the role B and vice versa. The per scenario lasted from 7 to 10 minutes approximately each one. And I just was sure in the breakout rooms that they were aware of the role and they got the information and what they needed to do. And then they were joined in the main session where they performed the scenario. And then besides these two, in addition to these two exams, they completed a demographic questionnaire. It was more just to know their personal information and Spanish background, like how they learn Spanish or if they have traveled to Spanish-speaking countries and that kind of thing. So that was pretty much the main data obtained of this research. Now, in order to know if there is any impact in the uterine fluency, these metrics were the ones chosen because they have been considered significant in previous studies, and they are measures from the three dimensions: speech fluency, repair fluency, and breakdown fluency. So these were the main ones analyzed, and I'm going to explain them later. But each of one has a different way to be measured. But how to measure them? So I use these tools. The first one and the main one was PRAD. This helped me to measure the position of the pauses and to distinguish if they were silent or filled pauses. The silence pauses, based on previous research, was considered with these features. There were some manual adjustments needed, so if it was necessary, they were made. Besides PRAD, I use as well some manual measurements that I counted in Excel, such as the number of words or number of syllables, these kind of things. And besides having these tools, we needed to follow some methodological decisions as well. So the first one was to establish coding criteria for oral data. So as you know, when we communicate orally, there are some things that are not exactly the same than when you write them. So when you write them, you have the subject, verb, complement, you have all kind of things. But when you're speaking, you kind of switch from ideas, or you skip subjects or verbs or something like that. So it was necessary to find like a standardized coding procedure. And that's what it was developed to implement during the codification phase to ensure consistency across the whole coding phase. And besides this, there was as well an adjustment of coding times, because in previous research, the sample used to analyze this uterine fluency have been taken with samples that range from 10 seconds to 300 seconds. So my data, LP 15 minutes, scenario 7 to 10 minutes is really too much compared with the samples before. So the decision was the next. So for the coding, the LPE and the scenario, I took 3 samples of each one. In the LPE, I took 1 sample where participants use present, 1 where they use past, and 1 where they have to ask questions when they had the role play moment. For the case of intermediate high advanced level, it could be past or future because their level is more advanced, so it could be either one. And in the case of the scenario, there was 1 section at the beginning of the scenario, then another one in the middle, and then another one at the end of the scenario. Each section was from 30 to 45 seconds, meaning that each participant had around 113 seconds of performance in the sample, and total timing was around 6,328 seconds of total coding for the data. In addition to this, an integrated reliability check was conducted using 10% of the total data set with an overall agreement rate exceeding 95%, thus confirming the reliability of the data. So for you to understand better, like an example of the sections of the segments used to code, I'm just gonna play some examples. So I'm gonna start with the LPE section of an intermediate learner in the section where she was asking questions.
Tengo 4 preguntas. Primero, ¿qué ciudades ofrece esta oportunidad? Y segundo, tome el avión para vivir or para viajar.
Okay, now I'm gonna show another example from the same participant when she was performing the scenario in the middle of the scenario in the halftime.
Si no compro las decoraciones, pienso que tengo más dinero a pagar más para la comida y ella le encanta la comida, entonces creo que es importante tenía.
And now I'm gonna show you an example of the LPE for the high advanced level.
Pues por toda mi vida yo escribí mucho cuentos y mucha ficción, pero en escuela secundaria y últimamente la universidad descubrí que hay historias en todas personas y el periodismo es una manera para
And now I'm gonna finish with the last sample of the same participant, but performing the scenario.
pienso que depende en la locación. Pienso que hay como un horario muy específico con trenes, como por ejemplo cada hora. Entonces, si perdimos un tren, va a ser frustrante, pero podemos obtener boleto para otro tren.
So now you have a better idea on how the sections were divided and how the performance was as well. So Moving on the results, I'm going to start with the descriptive statistics. So these are the descriptive results per metric, and we can see that there is variability per level and per exam. Some metrics show more change than others, but to point out how big the differences are, I'll talk about the Collins D as an effect size. So this way, we're going to review like in a general way the metrics, starting by the speed and the repair dimensions. In this case, we can see that most measures show a large effect size, which means that the difference between proficiency levels is substantial. In other words, proficiency level explains a large portion of the differences we see in learners' fluency. Now, moving on the breakdown dimension, we can see that all the measures show different effect sizes. Much of them are large. So in this dimension, the type of exam plays a bigger role than in the speed and repair dimension, since the effect sizes are much larger than the previous information shown. So how can we translate this? It means that in 3 out of the 4 metrics for the speed, fluency, and repair, the intermediate high advanced level group performed better than the intermediate group. The only exception was given in the number of these fluencies per minute, where intermediate learners showed better results. Now, talking about the task type, the scenario task led to better scores in 6 measures. In the meantime, LPE format favor only 2 of them. So this is for these 2 dimensions of the fluency. Now, moving to the breakdown fluency, the intermediate high advanced level performed better than the intermediate one in all the measures and all the metrics, showing how proficiency level is a key determinant of the breakdown fluency performance. And looking at the task type, the scenario task led to better results or scores in general in 8 measures. In the meantime, LPE was favored with just 4 of them. So what can we conclude from these descriptive statistics? So the scenario favors most fluency measures in the intermediate high advanced level, with exception of 3, which are mean length of run, post frequency, and mid-class post ratio. And in the intermediate level, there were better results with the scenario as well, excluding field pauses, post frequency, and disfluency. So just taking as a reference the exam, the LPE favor both levels only in the metric of post frequency. And on the other hand, the scenario favor 5 measures in both levels. So in this sense, in a general way, the scenario provided with better scores in more measures than the LPE. However, it's important to know that the performance of the advanced level is better than the intermediate one in all the measures, except for the number of these fluencies per minute. So this is kind of like the big picture of the data. Now, going in deeper analysis with an inferential statistics, we have the following results. So I'm going to go metric per metric. So the first one is articulation rate, which is part of the speed. In this one, we can see that the p-values indicate statistically significant differences for both exam type and proficiency level, meaning that both factors influence the results. However, the effect sizes show that the exam type explains only about 2% of the variance, while the proficiency level explains about 65%. So, knowing that the articulation rate is the number of syllables divided by the total speech time measured in seconds, excluding silent pauses. So we just can say that the intermediate high advanced level produce more syllables per second without considering pauses than the intermediate level. And it occurs the same with the scenario. I mean, more syllables are produced in the scenario than in the LPE. So this is the main information for the articulation rate. Now, if we go to the speech rate, this one, it's the number of syllables as well, but this one is including the silent pauses. In this one, we can see as well that the p-values indicate statistically significant differences for both exam and level, and the effect size are similar to the previous one, where the exam type explains only about 2% of the variance, and the proficiency level explains about 79%, which is a large one, meaning that the proficiency level is the main driver of performance in this metric. How can we translate this with the measures? It means that the intermediate high advanced level produce more syllables per second, including pauses, than the intermediate level. And it occurs the same with the scenario, the same case than in the previous measure, in the previous metric. More syllables are produced in the scenario than in the LPE. So the same as before, more speech production is in the scenario for both levels than in the LPE. So that is like the main takeaway. Now moving on the repairs dimension, we start with the mean length of run, which is the mean number of syllables between two pauses longer than a quarter of a second. So for this one, we can see that the p-values indicate an statistically significant differences in the level, in the proficiency level, not in the exam. And the effect size just confirms this trend because the level explains 54% of the variance, while the exam don't have like any effect on this one. So what we can see again is that the proficiency is the main driver of performance in this metric, and the intermediate high advanced level produce more syllables between pauses than the intermediate level. And the type of exam does not influence this metric in any significant way. The second metric of the repair one is the number of disfluencies per minute. In this one, this is the total number of disfluencies divided by the total amount of time expressed in seconds and multiplied by 60. Disfluencies are self-corrections, repetitions, these kind of things. So in this case, there was a statistically significant interaction. That's why that one is included in this one between exam and level. That is the one that have like an insignificant value in this case. The effect size of these ones are small in all of them. But to better understand this interaction, we just can see the following graphic. So here we can see that while the intermediate level group performs better in the scenario task, producing fewer disfluencies per minute, the intermediate high advanced level shows an increase in disfluencies in the same task. So what it means that the LP favors the advanced group, but the intermediate group still produces fewer disfluencies overall in both task types. So that's something interesting to see, because it means that the advanced speakers use more disfluencies than intermediate learners in either format. So they still have a better score, the intermediate ones. So this was about repairs. Now moving on the breakdown dimension, we start with pause duration, which is the mean duration of silent pauses. In this one, we can see the p-values indicate statistically significant differences for both exam and level. And effect size is similar to previous metrics. It is small for exam, and in this case, it's large for level as well, with a 44%. So again, the proficiency is the main driver of performance in this metric as most of the previous one. And it means that intermediate high advanced levels has shorter silent pauses than intermediate one, and this trend occurs in the scenario. So silent pauses are shorter in the scenario than in the LPE. So now if we go from pause duration to pause frequency, which is the number of silent pauses per second, we can see that the p-values indicate statistically significant differences as well for both exam and level. And the effect size in this case is smaller, but there's still some effect from the level mainly. And once again, the proficiency is higher, but in this case, it's smaller than in the other cases. So, although the effect is medium rather than large, no? So anyway, it means that the intermediate high advanced level has less silent pauses than the intermediate level. And this trend does not occur in the scenario. I mean, silent pauses are less in the LPE than in the scenario. So comparing this pause frequency with pause duration, that was the previous measure, we can say that pauses in the scenario are more but shorter, and in the LPE are less but longer. So that's something to consider, amount versus the duration of them. About the mid-clause pause ratio, this is the total number of silent pauses with waiting clauses divided by the total number of words. In this case, we can see the p-value is statistically significant for the level primarily. And the effect size just confirmed the same trend, showing that the level explains just approximately 32% of the variance in comparison with the exam, which has a known effect at all. So one more time, the proficiency level, it's high performance of this one. It means that the intermediate high advanced level learners has less silent pauses waiting clauses considering the number of words produced than the intermediate level. So in the advanced group tend to pause less within the clause than the intermediate one, who have more pauses in this sense. So this trend is followed in the scenario. So silent pauses within clauses are less in the scenario than in the LPE. So similar to this one, we have the final clause, which is the pauses between clauses. The p-value in this case is significant, statistically significant for exam level as well, and the effect size is similar that in other previous cases. Exam just explains 6%, level 64%, which is a large effect. And again, proficiency has a higher weight in this sense. It means that the advanced has less silent pauses between clauses, considering the number of words, than the intermediate level. So the advanced tend to pause less between clauses than the intermediate one. And this is the same for the scenario. Less pauses between pauses in the scenario than in the LPE. So it's kind of following the same trend during all the metrics. Now the field pause ratio, which is the mean number of field pauses divided by the total number of syllables produced, show the same p-values and statistically significant differences for both exam and level. And for the effect size, the same as before. The proficiency has a bigger weight explanation of variance than the exam. So it means that the intermediate high advanced level has less field pauses considering the syllables produced than the intermediate level. And this trend occurs in the scenario, which means field pauses are lower in the scenario than in the LPE. So it's something pretty much seen around almost all the metrics. Now, the last measure we have is the number of field pauses per minute. This is the total number of field pauses divided by the total amount of time expressed in seconds and multiplied by 60. For this final metric, results show statistically significant differences for exam and for the interaction of exam and level. However, in the effect sizes, the proficiency level has a higher explanation of variance than exam and the interaction. So although proficiency level does not reach statistical significance, its effect size is larger than the other two. So as the same with the previous metric that has interaction, we can just see the graphic where we can understand better. So while the intermediate high advanced group performs better in the scenario task, which means fewer field pauses per minute, the intermediate level shows an increase in field pauses per minute in the same task. So in contrast, the LPE favors the intermediate group And the intermediate high advanced group still produces fewer field poses per minute overall in both task types. So then after all the explanations, metric per metric, how can I answer the first research question? Does utterance fluency vary in interview type, which is the LPE, versus the conversational, which is the scenario, assessment of Spanish as a second language? If so, how? So here we have the total variance per fluency metric is explained by type of exam in the following way. So we have that 8 of the 10 metrics have a small effect. So when we look at how much the type of exam affects fluency, we see that most metrics, the effect is small, like in this case, 8 of them. This means that while the differences between exam types are statistically significant, the exam type itself does not explain much of the variation in fluency scores, because we have as well that 2 of them has no effect at all. So in other words, whether the students took the interview style or a scenario-based task only slightly influences most aspects of their fluency. However, the results are statistically significant. So anyway, it's something to still keep in mind. Now, talking about the second research question, what are the differences in utterance fluency between the intermediate and intermediate high advanced levels of Spanish as a second language? We can just see the next. So the total variance per metric is explained by proficiency level as follows. So there is a small effect in the number of these fluencies per minute, medium effect in pause frequency, mid-close pause ratio, number of field pauses per minute, and a large effect in most of them because they are 6. Speech rate, articulation rate, numerical run, pause duration, final close pause ratio, and field pause ratio. So when we look at the proficiency level, it explains much more of the differences in fluency than exam type, as we saw in the previous data. For some metric, the effect is small, for some others is medium, and for most of them is large. So overall, the intermediate high advanced students perform better than the intermediate students on almost all measures, except in the number of these fluencies per minute, which was something seen in the descriptive and in the inferential statistics. So that's something that really like proof in both of them. So that's something interesting, that the number of these fluencies per minute is got a better score by the intermediate learners than by the advanced ones. Now, moving on, how can we conclude, or what can we take from all this information? So I'm going to show like the main takeaways. So the first one is proficiency matters most. So intermediate and high advanced learners consistently perform better than intermediate learners across nearly all fluency measures, except for the number of fluencies per minute again. So this is really completely distinguishable, the differences between these two levels in the metrics. The proficiency level then explains a larger share of variance than exam type, as we could see, in pretty much all the measures. So, however, it's something else to keep in mind is that exam type has a smaller but meaningful effect. So differences exist across tasks, though the impact is weaker than proficiency, but is still meaningful. So several metrics favor the scenario task at both levels. These are just some examples: speech rate, articulation rate, and pause duration. So even if the effect was small, the difference is meaningful. So it's something as well to something to keep in mind. So what to do with this information? So they will help us to know what is the best choice depending on the exam we want to perform. So the task choice should align with assessment goals. So if the goal is to elicit more extended speech, the scenarios may be more appropriate because it gives you higher articulation and a higher speech rate. The scenarios may also yield shorter pauses and fewer field pauses. However, the pause frequency may increase. That it was what I was saying before. So in this sense, and like as a consequence, if you want to evaluate extended uninterrupted speech, probably the interview type task is going to be a better fit. However, if you want to assess interaction and conversational fluency, probably the scenario is going to be a better fit in this case. So it really depends on the needs to choose what would be the best format to choose at the moment of evaluate oral fluency. So what are the implications of future research based on all these data and results showed? So first, findings are based on a small sample, just 28 participants, 14 per level. Broader studies are needed before generalization. So of course, it's suggested to keep on the research and doing it with a broader sample to get like more generalized results. And finally, research on perceived fluency is needed to understand which metrics most influence raters' judgments and which task type, if LPE, which is an interview type, or a scenario, better supports valid assessment decisions. Because these results were made on the performance of the acoustic measures, but when you are evaluating, you're not going to take like all these measures, you're just going to give a score. So it would be important to compare the score given by raters with the performance and to see what are the influence in one and the other. So that's why the perceived fluency is a research suggested in this case to like have better results on what type of implications it has, the uterine fluency versus the perceived fluency. Thank you so much. That's it. And did I have the questions?
Thank you so much, Larry, for an interesting presentation. Be sure and put your questions in the chat. We can start. We have a few questions from Jonathan Malacara that had to do with methodology, and one of his questions was, how did you determine the metrics for measuring the speech variables? And he asks, is there a framework for reference or literature about it?
Wait a second. So if I understand the question properly, you're asking why I chose this one? Yep. Okay, so as I mentioned, so these studies, and I have the source cited in each one of them, they have made different studies following these measures. There are more measures than these. This is just some of them. But in these studies, they showed that the results they got, it was significant. So that's why it was, they were the ones chosen, because it was like a way to compare if they are significant. Well, however, the studies made have been made with the research purposes formats. So it's not something to really compare exactly because the type of exam is different. And the sample taking is different because they take 20 seconds or something like that, and that's all. But in my case, I'm having a full conversation in the LP or a full conversation in person with the scenario. So I cannot compare exactly those results with mine because they're different, but the metrics were chosen because they were considered significant in those studies. Does it answer your question?
And he had a follow-up question also on methodology about how did you measure the pauses in Pratt? Did you simply measure them in milliseconds, or did you consider any other cue?
Okay, so I consider them that they were longer than 400 milliseconds and that they were below the 25 decibel threshold. So in the Pratt, there is the option to like you send the file and you send the configuration to just measure the silences. And what I did when the silences were already established, I was play them just to be sure that they were silences, because sometimes it was not a silence. It was just like an extension of a vowel or something like that. So I just needed to go manually to check one by one to be sure that they were really silent pauses or field pauses. So those are the manual adjustments I meant, just to confirm that they will be silent pauses or if they were real pauses. But like this is the configuration for Pratt, just more than 400 milliseconds and below 25 decibel threshold.
Thanks, Lady. Joan Molly-Torres also had a methodological question. She asks, how did you determine the intermediate versus intermediate high advanced levels of the participants? Had they taken an official or advisory OPI, that is with a certified ACTFL OPI tester as a baseline?
Okay, so in my data, let me show this one. Okay, so in this one, the intermediate level was taken like by default in the first place to a student who were in the 1004 class. They have to present at the end of the semester the LPE, which is part of the curriculum. So I took a lot of tests with them. I was the evaluator, so it was the official exam. If they pass, they were invited to join the research. If they did not pass, they were not. So in the intermediate level, that was the case follow. In the intermediate high advanced level, it was considered for the students who were majoring in Spanish and who were in their last year of studies. So this is a way to guarantee that they have already this level based on previous research that they have this level at this stage of their studies.
And we should mention that 1004 class is a fourth semester, right? Language class. Right. Jonathan had another question that focuses on methodology. He asks about the sociolinguistic questionnaire, right, that students responded to. What was the purpose? Was it only anecdotal, or did you use the response as a variable? Did you use any existing questionnaire, such as the bilingual language profile or another?
Well, in this moment, I haven't used that information yet. But the purpose of that is that if in case that you want to like duplicate the research or like follow the same type of research, we have like the same demographic information somehow, or at least it's similar to be able to know if there is something that you can compare. Like with future results and things like that, if there is something you can compare.
Okay. Results. Elaine Tyrone had a question. She asks, can you explain why proficiency level appears to affect number of disfluencies per minute less than it affected the 6 most impactful fluency measures you looked at?
Can you repeat what was the measure? Sorry.
Yeah, maybe good to go back. So why did proficiency level affect number of disfluencies per minute less than it affected the 6 most impactful fluency measures you looked at?
Okay, that's something that was like an interesting finding because the main expectations is that the advanced level are going to get better scores in all the measures than in the intermediate one. This metric, the number of disfluencies per minute, was the exception. So in that case, the intermediate level got better results. It could be, but I'm not sure. So there could be more research about that, but it could be because when they are in advanced level, they are more aware of what they know. So when they are speaking, they tend to self-correct more or to repeat more because they are just trying to it's like a self-awareness process. Yes, this is what I'm saying, or I know I said something wrong and you're gonna correct it. So there is more awareness in that sense. And that's why they make that occurring more disfluencies, like self-repetitions or self-corrections. And I would say that could be one of the reasons. However, maybe I would think that maybe in that case, more cognitive fluency research could be used to answer better, like in a deep way, this one.
Okay. Elaine, I assume that answered your question. I don't know if you have a follow-up or not,
Uh,
but go ahead.
I just noticed, and it's a slide at the end where you're reporting your results that made me ask that question. I did notice
Please?
the one before this. There. So, I just wondered, what is disfluencies per minute measuring as compared to the other large measures that had large variance?
Okay, so based on the results, the effect size of this metric, it means that the variance is explaining just a small part with this one. Why? Something that's really not known yet, because
Oh, okay.
factors that can like be involved in the performance. So the effect size of this one is small.
Okay, sorry. Okay, got it.
No, that's fine.
Can you still account? I mean, these measures are clearly looking at different things.
Yeah, like each one of them have different like purposes, but the effect size of them in terms of statistic number varies in each one of them. Some of them have small effects, some of them have medium, and most of them have large.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And Andrew Cohn actually had a related question. He asked, do your findings then value disfluency, as with your intermediate respondents, as a positive thing? Should assessment coaches teach respondents to be disfluent? He says, in Japanese, disfluency is a sign of humility. The Finnish are known for disfluency. What role should AI play in preparing students for performance on oral measures such as conflict resolution, right? For example, terrain versus plane.
That's so much information. We'll just start.
There's a lot. So maybe start, yeah. So do your findings value disfluency as a positive thing? I guess maybe start with that.
Well, I think it could be. I think it could be a possibility to show that as something positive because it's showing like self-awareness of the language and how the students in a more advanced level are recurring to self-correction and repetition and the kind of things to keep the communication going and to like show their proficiency in this sense. So I think that's a possibility. That is something positive in that sense. Yeah, but
I can help you out a little. What I meant was that when I heard the snippets you gave us, the more beginning students clearly not only could not speak Spanish so well, but their pauses were very American English. You know, that kind of stuff. Do you in your Spanish class, were these students taught how to fill pauses in Spanish? To use pues, and those kinds of fillers, or just left to their own devices? Because what we see in the sample, they're left to their own devices, and they're American English thinkers between what they say, what they dredge up in Spanish. So I sit here, my reaction was then, what is fluency? And I would throw that back to you. What is fluency? Because on which you approach fluency, still, what do you do with that? Because if I'm a person on the street and I'm asking for directions and I ask someone like that who's an American living in Spain or whatever, I might come away thinking, wow, that person is really disfluent. And not in the positive way, not in the Japanese way of being humble, of disfluency being humility. You know, as Stumbling around is your best way to apologize in Japanese. Don't speak too fluently, or you're going to turn your listener off. You're going to as being slick or snide. Okay, so I just told that, and with AI right now, I'm asking you, what benefit might it have? Could we be teaching our learners of Spanish how to be disfluent, how to use pues and este in a way that makes them disfluent appropriately rather than awkwardly?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that it's something important to consider. Uh, because it's true what you say, you know, it's not the same deposits that are like than deposits that are like more native, because anyway, even native speakers have that type of pauses, so that's something natural in the speech. So it's not something that can be like taken away. Like if you don't have any disfluency, you're perfect, because it doesn't even work in the real life. Even native speakers have disfluencies in that sense. You self-correct yourself, and that's like a good way to show, as you say, fluency in the language. So I think that that could be maybe joining with communicative strategies to be taught in the class, as you say, to show how when they don't know how to say something, or when students don't know what to say, how can they manage that instead of being just in complete silence, which would be silent pauses instead of being in complete silence. Just take it to the stage of, okay, let's remake the sentences. Let's ask for repetition without asking directly for repetition, because there are other ways to ask for the information again. So you can just ask for clarification, or there are so many other ways to communicate that you want the information again. So yes, that will be something important to consider. These fluencies can be worked in class as a way to improve their performance of the speaking, and not exactly seen as something bad, but something that they can work on, and they can make it sound like a native disfluency, or just to say something like that. And
And I think,
about
oh, go ahead.
does it answer a little bit of the part?
Yeah.
And about the AI, um, I think I have seen some cases, but I don't have like a technical information right now, where some instructors have like they kind of create the AI to be like a partner. So they can just like create the information, and they can have the AI as a partner in case that they cannot be with another pair. Like in this case, the scenarios were pair, fine, but let's think about online classes or asynchronous classes or something like that. There could be the creation of AI options where they interact with the platform as if they were a person, and it can just be given the parameters. What is your level? What type of topic you're going to talk about? Like things like that. That way, the AI could be like a pair for the student, having at the same level and that kind of things. And that's a good way as well for them to practice. So when they're gonna go outside and they wanna do that in the real life, they could be more prepared. Of course, if you can do this in the classroom, that's great. But I'm just thinking about cases where they need extra activities outside the classroom, or if they have online or asynchronous classes.
Okay, well, I'm going to jump in here because we're at the top of the hour, and I just want to say thank you to Larry for this very engaging presentation, and Carol for her facilitation. On behalf of Carla, I want to wish you all a happy holiday season, and we look forward to seeing you at a presentation in the spring. See you all soon.
Thank you all for coming.